and welcome back to Book and Trowel, and today I want to talk about the trowel part of it. So this here is my archaeology trowel. So if you didn't already know this, I actually have a BSc in archaeology, and this is the trowel that I used for the digs that I went on. So part of the course was I had to go on dig placement, and because I ended up having to repeat my first year, because I am not an academic, I'll say right now I am not an academic, I am more of a practical person rather than doing the whole paper side of it. I had to repeat my first year, and in that time I also went on a second dig. So my first dig was with York Archaeological Trust, and we were digging up the back ends of old Victorian houses, and part of the group was also digging up the remains of an old Victorian pub. And the stuff we found was very, very interesting. I was actually very happy with the stuff that we found. We found glass bottles, we found obviously the underfloor plumbing as well. I found this fantastic coin, one of my best finds to date. And so that was my first taste of being on an actual archaeological dig. And before going on that dig I needed to get a trowel, obviously, so this is the one I bought. Not very easy to find, I must admit. So that was my first ever dig. That was my first taster of being in a, a pit in the ground and finding different materials, and it was very rewarding. I rather enjoyed it. The second dig I went on after I repeated my first year was in Rousey. Now this was a rescue dig, so this dig site is one that that the group that I was with came back to every year. It was along the coast, and it was actually a multi-period site. I didn't actually come out with anything as such. We came out with like the odd bits of shells stuff. Other people managed to find really interesting things, but me personally, I didn't find anything on that dig. But when we took a step back, it didn't matter, because what was there was a multi-period site. There was the remains of a Neolithic house, there were the remains of a block tower, which is a structure that you can find mostly only in Scotland, which is Iron Age, and we also found the back end of a Viking longhouse. So even though material-wise we weren't really coming out with much, or at least in my own experience there I didn't come out with anything, the remains of all the other stuff was fascinating. The fact that it was a multi-period site, which tells us a bit more into societies and how every time we've been colonised, or just people, they kind of just migrate to the same places repeatedly. My last two digs that I went on were part of a placement. So on the archaeological course that I went on, in your third to fourth year in between, you would have a placement year. And so I went on to archaeological digs for my placement year. And this was working with the My Place project, which was working with school children, kind of to show that this sort of part of the history world is what helps with the other part of the history world. So we were basically saying to the children, you see all this stuff that you tend to find, after we've catalogued it, after we've managed to do all the other paperwork that you don't have to see, that then may go into the museum. We can learn a lot of information from the stuff we find in the ground alongside museums. So basically trying to show that there's no difference between history and archaeology, which for some reason history and archaeology seem to have this massive fight with one another, which makes no sense because it's all the same field, just different aspects of it. Hence the same for my logo as well. The book is for history, which talks about the records and the accounts and the deaths and the marriages and the kings and the queens. That's what the book part of my logo represents, and the trowel represents all the artefacts that we find in the everyday folk. And why there seems to be this kind of butting of heads, I do not understand, because it all helps to merge in together to help us paint a better picture of the past from the stuff we find. And that's basically what these digs were talking about for the children, was saying, this stuff that we find, this is what goes into the museum, this is what we can learn from the stuff we find in the ground. And the kids loved it. They loved digging the sort of stuff that they were finding. They were finding bits of coal, which you can find pretty much everywhere. But they were also coming out with like buttons, bits of pottery, coming out with bits of flint, all tiny little bits, but they were managing to come out with all these things. And one of the areas that I dug out was at Bowling Hall. Now Bowling Hall is a building you find in Bradford. It's based in Bradford, but it's got a very strong connection to the Civil War. Because the people who lived at Bowling Hall at the time, they actually were royalists, and there's a bit of a ghost story that in one of the rooms there is a ghost, because the house is laid out with different periods of like the different people who lived there. But it's got a big massive focus on the Civil War, and it's got a ghost story in one of the rooms, that apparently in one of these rooms there was like a general that ended up staying with the family, and a ghost ended up seeing him, and she said, "Oh, pity poor Bradford." And after hearing that, he changed his mind and decided, oh, we're not going to do this certain battle tactic that we came up with. Whether that's true or not, can't really say. But while digging at Boiling Hall, we actually found some pistol shot. Now we found some clear pistol shot, and then we also found a metal pistol shot, which we ended up dropping because we were showing it to the children, so we lost it again. But we found pistol shot while we were there, and that was very interesting because that ties in with the story of the Civil War and the people who were there during the Civil War. And it also showed a different side of it, going, people used to train with their weapons, and they may have used clear pistol shot to help learn how to use it, so they're not wasting valuable resources. So that's just a little bit of the background into some of the digs that I have been on. And today I wanted to answer some archaeology based questions that tend to get asked either by children or by adults, but this just tends to be the questions that a lot of archaeologists tend to get asked an awful lot. So question number one is, what is archaeology? Good question. Archaeology is the study of past civilizations, communities, societies, whatever word you want to use. It is the study of human activity by looking at the things that we tend to leave behind. So that could be from structures to the little bits of things, like the turn of phrase of, you know, one man's rubbish is another man's treasure. We use that information to help us paint a picture of the past, and it could be pistol shot, like I said, it could be coins, it could be shoes, it could be wood, it could be buildings, it could be weapons, it could be anything that we find in the ground, even if it's not materials, it's just a structure or a layout or an effect that people have done. Anything that humans have done, so it could be from making a ditch or building a wall, anything like that, helps us to understand past societies, past civilizations, and that is what the study of archaeology is. It's the study of past humans and our activity, basically. Question number two. Do archaeologists dig up dinosaurs? No. No. We do not dig up dinosaurs. If we ever dig that far down to find stuff, then we obviously get the actual experts in, who are paleontologists. Think of Ross from Friends. He studied dinosaurs. Archaeologists don't study dinosaurs. We don't study that far back. We study about us. We look at humans and past humans and what humans did. We don't care for dinosaurs or anything like that. We look at, yes, past animals that we may have eaten, but more often than not, we look at civilization, we look at humans. That is the study of archaeologists. So no, we don't study dinosaurs, we don't study fossils or anything. We may stumble across them, but we don't study them. That is not our field of expertise. That is for a paleontologist, not an archaeologist. Question number three. What is an artefact? This is an interesting question because it's something I never actually thought about. What is an artefact? An artefact is a piece of material that is movable. That is what an artefact is. So it's not architecture or anything like that. An artefact is the shoes, it is the pottery, it is the weaponry, it's anything that has been man-made and can be transported elsewhere. Well, not necessarily man-made, it can also be Stone Age based materials as well, like hand axes, which is a stone. It's anything that can be moved, and it's anything that's been modified and changed by humans. That is what an artefact is. Question number four. What is the most exciting find you have found? For me, it is an Edwardian coin. On my first ever dig, I found this coin, and it's been my best find to date. Maybe if I go on more digs, I might find more things, but to this day, that coin is my best find, for me personally. But if you're an archaeologist, what's your best find? Let me know. Number five, how do you find a site? Well, the main way that archaeologists tend to find sites is through word of mouth. We also revisit old sites as well by going through records and documents and things, but mostly it's word of mouth that we learn of stuff, maybe from farmers that have dug up something, or from metal detectorists that have found something, or just from people walking around and they've stumbled across something along their walks. If you can remember finding a specific thing and you know where you found it, inform your local archaeologist, or inform your local museum, or inform somebody who'd be able to then get the archaeologists in so we can survey the area, get an understanding of what might be in there. And one of the main things we have to do before doing any digs nowadays is we have to get a clear idea of what it is we're going to be trying to find. What is it we're going to be looking at? Is it going to be any good for us? Is it going to help contribute to our bigger knowledge of the past? Is it going to help in that anyway? Because digs are expensive, unfortunately, and we don't always get the money for them. We don't always get the go ahead for a lot of them as well. It's a lot of time, effort and money, and unless we have a clear understanding of what it is we're finding, whether it's going to contribute, are we going to learn anything new, it's a difficult one. But yeah, to find a site, it's mostly from word of mouth. Question number 6, how do sites get buried? Time, basically. Basically, over time, the earth does its thing. And natural disasters and natural occurrences, not necessarily disasters, but natural occurrences can also happen that can help to bury things. So for example, I will take York for example with Jorvik. Most of the stuff we found there was waterlogged, so we managed to come up with lots of wonderful materials such as wood and leather and like actual textiles and stuff like that. That sort of stuff doesn't tend to survive, that tends to degrade over time, but thanks to the fact that the area where York was so waterlogged because of the amount of floods that York endures, even to this day, it managed to preserve these wonderful materials. So it could be stuff like that, it could be digs, it could be volcanoes, it could be earthquakes. It's just time and things being abandoned as well. As things get abandoned, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a natural thing like a flood. I can tell you about Warren Percy for example, which is also an archaeological site in like North Yorkshire. That is a medieval village, or was a medieval village, and the only thing that stands is the church. And what happened there is the place just got abandoned because over time the people living there just couldn't live there no more, so they decided to move on with their lives. And the place got abandoned, and so the houses just disappeared, you know, they crumble, they fall apart, nature does its thing and takes over, and that is how archaeology ends up going and getting buried. And then we come along and go, oh look at that, you know, this period and stuff, it's fascinating. Yeah, Mother Earth just does her thing. Question number 7 is, what sort of tools do archaeologists use? Well, I've already shown you that we use trowels, but we also use picks, shovels, even large machinery as well, such as mechanical diggers, to help us to break the soil in the first place. We use specialised trowels, not just these ones, but you can get smaller ones, you can get bigger ones as well, to help unearth the different materials, and that tends to be the sort of stuff we use. It's mostly manpower. Like I said, we tend to use we may use a mechanical digger to break soil to begin with, but because we want to be really careful of what we find, we tend to mostly just use shovels and picks, and then get on our hands and knees and use trowels to actually start carefully getting rid of the soil, just to try and preserve anything that might be there. Because at the end of the day, the whole point of digging is to find stuff, and you don't want to damage the stuff, you know, that you're finding. Number 8 is, how do archaeologists get artefacts out of the ground? Very carefully. Very, very carefully. So if you find something in the ground, you will use something like a trowel and you would dig around it and slowly release it from the soil so it can pop out carefully. But you've got to be very, very careful. In a lot of cases you also have to do planning of the sort of materials you find. You've also got to take photographs of the things that you find. There's a lot of different other steps as well, not just the, oh, found a thing, dig, get it out. There's a lot of other steps that you need to do to take into consideration, especially when you're finding something of interest. A lot of the times if it's bits of pottery or bits of glass or anything like that, you can literally just dig, put it into a finds tray, and then we might end up on washing. In a lot of cases, if it's little bits of material like little bits of bone, little bits of pottery or anything like that, you would just carefully dig it out and put that item into a finds tray to then be processed later. But there is a lot of other steps in between as well. Question number 9. What happens to the artefacts? Well, once the artefacts have come out of the ground and we've done all the photographs and we've done all the planning and we've done all the other paperwork that needs to be done, we tend to wash the finds. It's that simple really. We tend to wash the finds, we tend to catalogue the finds, we tend to bag the finds, we tend to make sure that they're nice and preserved depending on what the finds are. Obviously we want to keep them as secure and as safe as possible. If you found a waterlogged thing, then it has to go into a dark box with water to keep it nice and preserved so no light can go onto it. Because obviously it's been in the ground, it's been quite happy in the ground, and then we've come along and dug it up, so we need to make sure it stays as happy as possible just so we can analyse it more. But yes, we would then wash the finds. In a lot of cases we may sieve through finds. We do that when we go through our soil just to double check that we have not missed any little details, because it could be the little details that blows up our whole understanding of the past or that period or anything like that. So we sieve through them as well. We sieve through dirt, sieve through all the finds, clean them all up, and if there's anything that tends to be very fantastic quality, helps us to paint a better picture, helps us to understand more, then maybe after a lot of paperwork and after everything's been done, then those wonderful finds may then make their way into a museum so everyday people can see the stuff we found. So it tends to be the best quality of items that we find that you tend to put into museums, because nobody really wants to see coins that are rusted and you can't see them or anything like that, and it's just maybe got a massive amount of erosion on it. People want to see the stuff that's at the best of quality. In other cases it could be bits of textile, and if you've got a tiny bit of textile, that can still go into a museum, because just that bit of textile that survived, that alone helps people to paint a better picture. So depending on the thing will depend on it eventually being on display. There's, for example, with the York Archaeological Trust, there is so many different finds out there that are genuinely just, they're not on display. You will not be able to see them unless you purposely have a request to research that period or anything like that, and you end up contacting the necessary people. But when it comes to like the Copygate dig, which is famous for Vikings, it wasn't just Viking material they found Victorian material, they found Roman material, they found all sorts of different material. They just primarily focused on the Viking stuff because a lot of it was so wonderfully preserved, and at the time there was little to no information about Vikings at the time when they decided to make the museum and things, so there's just so much out there. But yeah, most of it tends to be in a warehouse, getting catalogued, getting updated, making sure it's been preserved and safe and recorded, and people can use that for research projects and stuff like that. And the final question is, how do you become an archaeologist? And this is a double question. Can you take part in a dig? I will answer the second question first. Yes, you can take part in digs. We always want to have people digging on our sites. There is a lot of digs out there that you can take part in where you can volunteer and do excavating, whether it be for 2 weeks, for a month, however long you want to. The more diggers we can get on board, the more people that can help us to clean our artefacts, the better. It just makes the process so much easier, so much quicker. In regards to actually becoming an archaeologist rather than just going on a dig because you're interested in a bit of history, that tends to be a lot more work. To actually go into an actual field of archaeology to work, you need to have the pieces of paper, I'm afraid. You need to go and study, you need to go and get a BSc or a BA in archaeology, and then ideally you should then progress like a master's, maybe even a PhD. And the sort of jobs that you can get with an archaeology degree is you can work in a museum, you can become a lecturer, you can then work on doing field work, and it's one of those difficult things if you want to be an archaeologist as an actual career. It's a vicious circle, unfortunately. You need to have experience in certain fields, but you also need the paperwork, and it kind of goes like this. So like I'm at the moment, I'm kind of stuck in this limbo of going, what do I do with my archaeology degree? I want to get back into doing archaeology, but I've not actually been on that many digs. I've not had any experience doing commercial archaeology, which is like a no hours contract where they kind of just use you when they need you. But I want to pursue that. It's a possibility of something I want to pursue. So the sort of jobs you can do with an archaeology degree under your belt is become a lecturer. If you get to the point of having like a PhD, you can become a lecturer. You can then go on research projects. You can then be responsible for archaeological digs yourself, as long as they tie into whatever it is you're doing. That's probably one of the best routes to go down. To be a field archaeologist, you might need a BA, maybe even a master's, depending on the fieldwork area that you go on. It can really vary, but they also require you to have actual hands-on experience. But in order to get hands-on experience, you need to be able to go on the dig. But the dig when you have hands, yeah, it's a vicious circle. Hence why when you come on to like a lot of archaeological courses, they tend to encourage you to have at least a little bit of experience by going onto a dig. Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video of me answering some archaeology based questions. As I said, I have an archaeology degree and currently I'm in the limbo of trying to suss out what I want to do with that said degree. I did work in a museum straight after university, and then I was like, no, I'm not doing a master's, I'm not doing a PhD or anything like that, because I'm not an academic. I struggle when it comes to the academic side. I'm more hands-on, would rather be in the pit digging rather than writing up stuff. That's more my sort of thing. And I'm now at that point of going, how to get into an actual sort of job that I want. Yeah, I will get there. But yeah, please don't let any of this discourage you. If you want to pursue archaeology, do it. Just do it. It is very rewarding, especially when you're finding things. Whether you want to do it as a volunteer or actually go into it as a career, go for it. Do it. It is very competitive, I will say, because it's a very niche sort of thing. Same goes for history. It's quite competitive. It's very niche, but you can do your own thing about it. If you really wanted to, you could go on archaeological digs for free. You know, well, not necessarily for free, but you could go on volunteer digs and do this, like what I'm doing, do YouTube videos to do with history and archaeology, introducing it to the general public, helping them to learn more. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in another one very soon. Thank you for watching.